Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, It's an Honor to Be Here, curated by Maria Burke and Madeline Beaumier. Today, we are thrilled to present artist Deb Berkebile. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be a variation of bandwidth, and if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and welcome, Deb.
Well, welcome everybody. I am Deb Berkebile, and I live in Northeast Ohio. I am up in Conneaut, which is a very small town. I'm about a mile or two away from the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, up in Amish country and all of that. I am a mechanical engineer by trade and an artist by every other waking hour that I possibly can, do my trade of artwork. Um, I have a daughter and a son. My daughter lives in New Mexico, and my son lives in New York, upstate New York, in a little town called Saratoga Springs. He has two daughters. My granddaughters are very precious. One is 4, and one will be 2 soon in May. And they call me Glammy. So I actually go up there quite often. I drive up and I spend lots of time with them. So it's very enjoyable. And I do go out west quite a bit once a year and see my daughter also in New Mexico. So it's fun traveling. I am a naturalist and an environmentalist at heart. And my current body of work that you'll be seeing today explores satellite imagery and creating false color artistic depictions of a remote sensed image of satellite. I do have 11 quilts in this series. I have sold a few of them, but in the series, it's called Earth in 3 Bands, RGB, which means red, green, blue. And in this exhibit at the Rife Gallery, you'll see 5 of those specific GIS quilts. And Geographical Information Systems, or GIS, is basically, in a nutshell, your mapping. When you look at your phone and you bring up your Google Maps or whatever, you're picking out points of where you want to go, and that's basically what GIS is. And I've included the 5 quilts in this presentation, and you'll get to see my process and how I finish those. My inspiration was in 2014. I had gone back to school for the 3rd time when I was 50 years old, and I decided to take GIS to get into this. I wanted to find some variations. I love mapping and all that. So while I was in one of these classes, in a remote sensed class, we had to research and look up different pictures and look up the satellite imagery itself. So during that time at my research, I found a book that was called Earth as Art. And I fell in love with the images. So they're very vivid, they're bright, vibrant, and that's just what caught me. I couldn't put this book down. It was just so amazing. And I wanted to start my art quilts right then and there, because I had been going to different places and actually looking at art quilts, and I had it in my mind that I had done quilting before, but I really was inspired by the art quilts. So that's how I got started of this one little book. And then after I finished my GIS certificate program, I started right in. I was collected these images and started doing them in fabric. And the first 2, which you'll see today in this talk, went to the Houston Quilt Festival in 2014. And everybody's like, "You're going to try and do that?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to submit them. All they can tell me is no, So I submitted them and they both went down there. I didn't win any prizes, but that wasn't the point of it. It was trying to get my artwork out And I do kind of have a niche in that nobody else, I believe, is taking the satellite imagery itself and putting them into art quilts. I've seen some of them painted or in other, medias, but never in the quilt world. So my process starts, as you see here. I enlarge whatever satellite imagery that I am going to be using, and I enlarge it to a point where, kind of a good point to start with. My first quilts were only probably about 36 by 36, but as you see, as I went along, I got bigger and bigger in my production. So I enlarged the picture, and at first I actually started with Photoshop, and I would put the photo in there and I would cut out the little pieces and I would do it on layers, and each layer was its own color. And then I would print them out on freezer paper, and that would be my pattern. So it took quite a bit a long time to put your photo in there and then, take the little cutting tool and I would cut all that out. So now, not so much. I actually have streamlined that process completely. I blow up the image in Photoshop to where whatever size I want it to be. And then I print it out on just a colored copier. And that now is my pattern. And as you see in these pictures, this is of the prismatic springs in Yellowstone. At the upper left, you'll see that actually was just printed on a regular copier printer. And then I've now cut it up in the different, colors that I want to specifically use. And those are what those pieces are up there. So as I went along, during this process, and when I put this together, I use raw edge applique. All of my GIS quilts are that. They don't go on a bed. It's not ever going to be washed. So for me, I don't really care if there's little strings hanging, because that actually gives it a little more detail and a little more depth. So I'm not that particular. Also in this process, you'll see I have been putting it together, and then at the very bottom right-hand column, or the right-hand section, is where it's actually on my long arm and I'm quilting it. So this piece, I actually assembled it on the long arm. I had one back piece and just started assembling all those pieces on top of the one piece of fabric, and then just started stitching it down. So that's how this one actually went together. In this, I use lots of hand stitching. I've used fabric markers, but a lot of my details do come from my long arm quilting machine. So in this process of trying to find the right colors, I used to use commercial fabric, and I now hand dye all of my fabrics. So what you're seeing here is, this is kind of my daughter said it looks like a chemist out on my, kitchen. I do this in my kitchen. It looks like a chemist has just brought out all their little, bottles and vials. And these are MX dyes that I use. They're powder form. And in the left bottom corner, that is the final process of the prismatic springs. So during that time, in that middle, you'll see a kind of taking the colors and I'm mixing it in water, and what I have the little tabs here of what the different colors that I actually were making. So that's how I kind of come about to where I get the certain colors that I'm wanting. Here, this is the low immersion dyeing, and that's how I make that I actually dye the fabric. You're using less water, and it's actually, this process is so easy and it's fast and it's so fun, because like I said, you can be a chemist and create your own colors, or you can take a pre-made color and actually just do that from the MX dyes. So here you're seeing the low immersion. These colors you will see later in one of the quilts that is the Great Lakes. So this is how I dyed the fabric for that quilt itself. I actually put it on the floor on top of plastic. It was so big. This quilt is 108 by 85. It was supposed to be a triptych at first, but after I got all this fabric and it was dyed, and I was like, oh my gosh, how are you going to hang that in a triptych? Everything has to line up. So that was the end of that. All three pieces got sewn together, and that's how the Great Lakes became a very great big piece. So we'll see that later here. But the immersion dyeing part of it, I use a book that's called Color by Accident by Ann Johnston. And she shows you how to do this low immersion dyeing, and it's fabulous. It really is. And it's such a fun process, like I said. It's one of my favorite parts of probably my whole process is trying to get the colors right that I want to use. So another process I use too is called deconstructed screen printing. And here I am in my friend's laundry room. So she has quite everything behind me does not look pretty, but she has a big table in the middle of her room, and we make art. And this one is a deconstructed screen printed fabric. What you do with this is you use thickened dyes. And what I use for this, I used a stencil on the back of the screen. So I actually stenciled the thickened dye on the back of this screen and let it dry. And then when it's thoroughly dry, my fabric is down on the bottom. And I'm using the screen now with another thickened dye, which is just clear, with no dyes in it. It's just a clear paste. And I am squeegeeing that through the screen for the back of the screen. That thickened dye will now, as I'm squeegeeing it through, the back kind of loosens up, and then it's now printing on the fabric as you go along. Hopefully that's a good description, but you can ask questions later about that. So this piece was used in a democracy piece. You will not be seeing this, but I use this quite frequently in my designs, and it's a quick way to get like a lot of patterning and stuff when you're going along. So now we're going to get into what is at the Rife Gallery. These are my GIS quilts, and they are, like I said, all applique, they're raw edge applique. And what you'll be seeing these next few screens, you'll see on the left-hand side, this is the Google Earth picture of what you see with the naked eye. You can see all these features, you just don't see the vibrant colors. So when you go look at the Eye of Sahara, you're going to see on the left-hand side, it's very deserty and it's just brown. So as the satellite image goes, and NASA takes the satellite image in the middle section, in the middle picture, which this is how these are all lined up on these next few screens. This is the NASA satellite imagery. It's very vibrant, as you can tell. And each feature is different because the colors are not by the natural eye. That's why it's called a false color. So the false color uses the spectral zones, i.e. like rocky areas can be green, black areas can be forests, and the light reflecting areas could be red. So when the satellite takes it, it's all false color. This satellite camera actually uses advanced imaging sensors and lenses to capture images of the Earth's surface. They scan the Earth's surface for signals emitted or reflected by objects. That's why you get the different colors. They can capture a wide range of electromagnetic waves, and the satellite cameras are used for scientific research, environmental monitoring, urban planning, defense, and disaster management. So a lot of these satellite images actually can do data points for like a fire in the national forests. So it's used, it's pretty for me and I love it, but it is used in different ways that is for even disaster relief. So as we go through the slides, you'll see the variations that I spoke about. So this is the Eye of the Sahara. It is in the desert over in Africa. The feature has become a landmark for astronauts. They actually can see this when they're up orbiting the moon. They can, when they come around a certain area, they can actually pick this out when they're looking out down at the Earth. Although it resembles an impact crater, the structure is actually formed when a volcanic dome hardened and gradually eroded. There's a lot of controversy over this, of what exactly this piece of Earth is. So exposing the onion layers of the rock. So this is a 2001 Landsat 7 image. The desert sands appear white and pale yellow at the top left, and the lower right corners of the scene are less sandy, rocky areas are green, and the volcanic rocks are actually blue. So as you see, this is why they call it a false color. And here you can kind of see I've blown up my actual quilt. So in the middle there, you get a more detailed a view of my actual quilt. This one I kind of try to do a three-dimensional dome in the middle there. Doesn't really depict that. You can't really, it doesn't come out as much as I was trying to do a little more three-dimensional. But it turned out really nice. And I'm kind of, I really want it to look like the picture. So I'm very, symmetrical. Other people will have interpretations of it differently, but I'm really just like really wanting it to look like it. People like, that's actually out of fabric. And I'm like, yes, it is. This here is the Lena Delta. It's actually in Russia, over in the Siberia. It actually goes into the Arctic Ocean, and it is a extensive protected wilderness area and a wildlife refuge. It is the Landsat 7 image from 2000, and the vegetation appears as shades of green. The sandy areas in it are red, and the water as purples and blues. The Lena Delta is about 400 kilometers wide, and it divides into a multitude of flat islands. The delta is frozen tundra for about 7 months of the year, and then the spring transforms the regions into a lush wetland. So that's what you're seeing here during the spring, when it just evolves into this, wonderful looking wetlands. But if you're looking at it on Google Earth, as you see, you don't see much. So the satellite imagery really brings out really great details. So once again, here is your images of my quilt in the. Now here is the Great Lakes. You saw earlier in the earlier slides of me painting and dyeing this fabric. Actually, it was kind of like I was on the floor painting different areas and just kind of spreading the color everywhere of these great big pieces of fabric. So this is actually 108 by 85 inches wide. All the details on here, all the tributaries and the Great Lakes. And the red that you see on here are actually the big cities. So the bottom of Lake Erie, this is Cleveland at the very bottom here, the red little dot. Oops, sorry. Touch the screen. The red orangey dot at the bottom is Cleveland itself. You'll see the Finger Lakes in there. So it's really, when I started making this, I was only going to make it like 40 by 50 inches. And my one friend, in my critique group, they're like, oh no, it's the Great Lakes, you got to go bigger. And I'm like, well, 60 by, and they're like, no, it's the Great Lakes. So this piece, I actually printed the pattern out on my big printer at work. It's actually a digital printer that you can print out D size, E size, F size papers. So I was printing these one day and my boss walked by and said, what are you printing? And he knew it wasn't of a mechanical engineering thing I was working on. So I said, oh, nothing, nothing, nothing. So they just kept printing and printing of all of these big lakes. So that's how I used that one in a pattern. I actually printed it quite large to begin with. So this one here was my first quilt that I did. It is of the Painted Desert. It's in Arizona and it lies along an arid, erosion-prone badlands. It's multicolored mudstone and clays. And the Painted Desert extends from the Grand Canyon southeast to the Petrified Forest National Park. It stretches over 260 kilometers and encompasses 36,000 hectares, which is almost 36,360. Let's see, a hectare is 100 acres. So it's very large over encompasses a large national park. I've actually been here. I actually got to go here last year, so it was fun. We went to the Grand Canyon up on the north side of Grand Canyon this year. But then when we came down through Arizona, we actually got to see the Painted Desert itself. And that was like so terrific for me because I did this in 2014 and not been able to see it. And just, it was really nice to experience it. So this part here, you can see better. You'll see the volcanic cones up at the very top. So when you look at the Google Earth picture, you do see those volcanic cones up there. And in the satellite imagery, you'll see them also, but that's what the little black circles up at the top are. Those are all the volcanic cones that are still there today. I actually got to see some of those. Also, the volcanoes that are still there today. They're just not active, but they're impressive, very big, large in that area. The little Colorado River runs through it. And then the citrus forest is down here in black. So that was, one of the points where, everybody thought that was something like a mountain or something, but that actually depicts the forestry at the bottom. On this one too, there's a lot of paint. When I started, I mostly used commercial batik fabrics. So this one here basically all has batik fabrics on it. There was none of my hand dyes at this point in time. This is the Rocky Mountain Trench. The stroke of red in this 2004 Landsat 5 image is a remarkable interplay of light and cloud in the Canadian Rockies. This is right above Montana. It runs parallel with the peaks of the Canadian Rockies, ranging from 3 to 16 kilometers. The low clouds filled a part of the trench. It's like a valley in between the mountains. The low clouds filled a part of that trench near the border between Canadian provinces of Alberta and the British Columbia. The light reflecting nature of the clouds, coupled with a low sun elevation, resulted in this startling effect. So when the camera went across there, this whole, the trench was just filled with clouds and everything. So the reflection of that became red. In this depiction, you'll see not quite as much detailed. So this piece, my friend was like, this was all hand cut. So I started with the piece of gray in the back, and then I started, I started with the black in the back, and I was cut through for the gray. And I was hand cutting the whole entire thing. And I got to this point and my friend said, you're done with that. And I said, no, I am not done with that. Do you not see all the other, details that need to be done? She goes, no, you need to stop. This is done. She goes, you don't have to do all of it, and so this piece, I was like, well, being the symmetrical person in me, was very hard to stop, but it deserves, it actually serves a purpose, and it actually does have the detail that is needed. I don't now always have to be symmetrical, but I'm a mechanical engineer, so that's what happens in my mind. This piece is the Meander in Mississippi. You will not see this one at the Rife Gallery, but this is one of my later pieces, and it actually sold last year. I was really like, oh, my little baby has sold. This is right up above, actually Memphis, Tennessee. It's on the border between Arkansas and Mississippi. So the mighty Mississippi is the largest river system in North America and forms the second largest watershed in the world. And so as this river swirls and whirls down the land, it creates oxbow lakes and cutoffs accompany the meandering. So in this piece, oops, I guess I don't have one. Excuse me. In this piece to the right, you'll see my different variations. This was a deconstructed, I started with a piece that was deconstructed, screen printed from the back. And I layered these rivers on here, the different colors. All of this, you can see, is kind of like the different land. You'll have farmland, you'll have just plain land that just people live on, but that's the variations that you're seeing, and there's the different land plats itself. This one here is of a glacier. It's Susitna Glacier. This is actually my second piece, and this was the second one that went with the Painted Desert to the Houston Quilt Festival. It folds in the lower reaches of the valley. Glaciers can be caused by powerful surges of tributary ice streams. So in this, on the left, you can see that the glacier is flowing. It's marbled with dirt-free blue ice and debris coated with brown ice. The infusion where this comes together, in my depiction, you can see the blue ice. The red is all the vegetation. Here's a bigger depiction that you can see. The blue is actually the glacier itself and all the dirt that's the debris and everything that goes in those glaciers. I would really like to go to Susitna Glacier, but you have to fly in. It's not even available for you to go in and just see it. You have to fly in and actually go. Probably even take like a dog sled to get back to where you would even be able to get to this glacier. So it's very, very limited access. So those are my GIS quilts, and that's basically, you'll see 5 of those at the gallery. I have actually, since 2014, I've really become endeared with other techniques and other things. I love indigo, and favorite color is blue, and so I started looking into how to do shibori, which is a Japanese technique. So in these next few quilts, you'll see some of my other techniques of shibori, working with natural dyes. You'll also see rusted fabrics, and then the rusted fabrics are dipped into indigo. And some of my quilts, you also see that I finished them in a hand-stitched sashiko, which is called sashiko stitching, which is a Japanese technique also. So this piece here, I'm a mechanical engineer, so gears are very dear to my heart. I don't know why, but the gears just really speak to me, and you'll see several pieces of that. I put just white fabric. I always use really cotton print cloth. I put this in my shed, and I had all these little gears, different pieces, parts, and I put them on top of that fabric, and I just started rusting them. It was out there for several days, using vinegar and salt and all kinds of things just to rust these pieces of metal. And now I have kind of a garden outside of my house right now that are actually rust pieces. And when my lawnmower guy comes, he's like, "What do you want me to do?" I was like, don't touch my rusted pieces. Just leave them in a pile there. They'll be fine." So I do have like a little garden now of rusted pieces that I use. So these two pieces are actually framed. And how this came about was, I stitched around the rusted piece, the rusted gears, so that some of that would not be dyed. I put plastic on it, or I stitched it, just so I get some variations, so some of those gears would still stand out. And then I actually, after I did all, had it all manipulated, I threw it into a vat of indigo. This piece here, I did the background fabric, the kind of the yellowy rust colored. It actually was rust dyed in iron. And then I stitched it with a stencil of a Japanese style Itajimi styled stencil. The finishing touches, that piece was actually sewn on to a bigger piece of indigo dyed fabric. And then I hand stitched it with sashiko stitching. So all you see, the circular stitching, is the sashiko, and it's all hand done. My son was at one of my openings one time, and he heard a couple women talking, and they thought it was done by a machine. And he goes, "Mom, you need to put on there that that's hand stitched." I'm like, "Well, yeah, how else would you do that?" He goes, the ladies are thinking that you did it on a machine." And I was like, "Oh no, it's all hand stitched." So I make sure that I say that now, that it's hand stitched, feature. This one here was a traditional quilting pattern, and I kind of fussy cutted all of my pieces of indigoed fabric. You'll see that there's some rusted pieces. Some of the pieces were clamped with wood between them. The little circular patterns that you see are, I just clamped the fabric and threw it into a vat of indigo. There's some done on a cylinder. There's some done with a rope. So all the different techniques that I have done, I've kind of fussy cutted the pieces that I wanted to show in this. And it's called Bohemian Moons. So it kind of features all of my, different techniques in here. This one here, it actually was another rusted piece, as you see in the very background in the middle. That's what the fabric started with. It was a rust dyed piece of fabric. I ended up using rubber bands and marbles and just tying like dowel rods in different places with this. I used plastic again so that some of the cylinders would show up with, the different colors, and it wouldn't be indigo dyed. After I got all it bound up, I actually put it on a cylinder, on a round cylinder, and actually tied it with string around this cylinder very, very tightly. So it was like all these little pieces of fabric were sticking out because they had been, manipulated with rubber bands and everything. So it's on a cylinder and you see all these little, I want to say tits or whatever sticking out. And then that was actually thrown and put into the indigo vat. And afterwards, after you take it off, you can see the string, you see the lines of the string, and that's how it was tied onto the cylinder. And as the fabric overlaps on each other, you'll see this in this one, you'll see kind of looks like feathers. So that is when the fabric, as it was tied onto the cylinder, overlapped each other and the dye didn't particularly get in there as much as, on the top feature. I do have some new work. I spent from Thanksgiving up till February getting some new work at another exhibit here at the Westwoods Nature Center. So this piece here, it is a discharged fabric. So what you do with this, you actually manipulate it with clamping with wood clamps or tying it up on a rope. The left section was tied up on a rope. And you start with actually the black fabric here. So the black fabric is manipulated with shibori techniques, and then you put it in a vat of thiox. So that thiox actually takes the color out of your fabric. The bottom right-hand section is where you would see pretty much your black fabric will come out, and it's kind of like a gray or a white color at the bottom right. So some of that I decided I was also going to put it in because I love shibori. I put it into the shibori vat, and that's how you get the blue in on some different portions of it. This here again is a discharge. I decided not to throw this into the indigo. So this is basically, I took the black fabric, discharged it. The middle section was actually, I took a dowel rod and actually just put the fabric down on the dowel rod and actually just put it on the dowel rod and tied it really tightly. The left-hand section of it was put on a cylinder, and you actually tie your fabric as you go on a cylinder, and then you scrunch it up as you go. You tie some more, you scrunch it, so you get the valleys and peaks of that. And then that was actually discharged in thiox again. And then I just let those just be natural. So what you're seeing in this one, on the left-hand side, it kind of looks like tree roots, and that's actually a deconstructed screen printed piece. I rusted that fabric first, and then I did the deconstructed screen printing on it. I used a stencil that looked like all those roots and actually stenciled that onto the back of my screen, let it dry, and then went ahead and used just a plain non-colored thickened dye to bring that through the screen, as you saw the process earlier. The tree is actually Thermofax screened on. I blew that up to where it really would, complement the, the layout of this piece. On the bottom, you'll see some rusted fabric. That's like a organza on top of another piece of rusted fabric. And then the very bottom of that piece, there is some eco-printed fabric. I also do eco-printing. You take plant material, you bundle it up really well, and you steam it, and the tannins in the plant of the leaves or the bark or whatever you're using will transfer to your fabric, or paper if you use paper. This piece here is a picture of it. It is not finished, but it is also one in the Westwood Nature Center exhibit. I'm in that with a collaborated gal who actually is a painter. So she painted this picture, what is called the Welton Gorge. And she loves doing rocks, her whole painting. And I just fell in love with her artwork. And I was like, Brittany, can I use one of your pictures and actually put it into fabric? And she's like, wow, yeah, 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 yeah. So before the collaboration of this, this exhibit, I went ahead and took her picture and I blew it up quite big. It's probably about 50 by 60, I believe. And it was very vibrant. I loved her colors, and I use those colors myself. And I was going to go ahead and do the different fabrics in this. So as at the bottom, you can kind of see I've cut out rock fabric. I've used some greens, some blacks and browns. And when I got into it, I was like, am I crazy? There is no way I'm going to cut every little piece out of this fabric to make this. So I kind of regathered my thoughts. And as you see at the top right, I actually put the fabric up with the pattern under a light, and I actually drew out what I wanted to do on it from her picture. And I decided just to use fabric markers. It was easier, but it did take me a long time for this piece to actually, I would work on it every night, a few hours at night, just trying to, get to where, but it's a fabulous piece. I'm so excited about it. It's very enriched with color. Now, this piece here is of my eco printing. So I do teach that at different places. I have a couple venues, and I'm doing a great big class at my house this year because I'm retiring, and I'm going to use my trees and my plants and everything. I have kind of an eco-printed garden also. I have planted flowers and all kinds of different stuff that I know actually will print on fabric. So this piece here, we call it the Magic Maples. My cousin actually has sugar maples in her yard. I do not have, I have regular maples, but she has the sugar maples. And we found out over our processes of, eco printing for a few years now, that the sugar maples will print gold on one color and then kind of greenish, brownish, a little bit, uh, you can't see it here, but they're a little bit green on the other side of the leaf. So I did this on a crepe de chine silk, and I put the leaves this way, front, back, all across this piece of fabric. And we found out that it just prints differently. The sugar maples are just amazing. So this piece is actually framed. I have two pieces like that. One of them is hanging in my house, which will be there forever. And this piece actually is in an exhibit right now for sale. So once again, you see my gears. This is also a new piece. This is called Momentum. You will see this is another piece of the rusted gears. This was a piece that was done years ago when I did that first piece, and it just kind of didn't get used. So this last year, I was like, I'm gonna do something with this. And I actually went back to using commercial fabric, which was unusual for me. But this grunge polka dot fabric just spoke to this composition. I mean, it was just like I was auditioning all these hand dyed, fabrics, and I put them up on my design wall, and nothing was it just wouldn't spark. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to put some grunge up there, and oh my gosh, it became alive. So I don't, like I said, I don't usually use commercial fabric, but these just fit in really nicely. And on this one, you'll see there in the detail, lots of hand stitching. lots and lots of hand stitching. And this is a deconstructed screen printed piece to begin with again. And then I've also put a few gears, the actual gears that I rust my fabric from. I've actually stitched those. If you'll see in the upper, on the right hand piece, you'll see it's up in the upper left hand corner, and then in the detailed, you'll see them right up there up at the top. Those are actually metal gears that I've actually just stitched onto the piece. And there's a couple other places in this quilt that have the gears stitched onto it. I've also used like some Thermofax screen printing, the little gears on the borders. I've used some different techniques with that also. So this is probably my favorite one of probably the pieces I've done. And it's just a brand new one. So that is the end of my presentation. And you can find me at Instagram at Deb_Berkebile. On my Instagram, there's also a little place where you can go in and sign up for my newsletter. I do teach classes. I teach the Shibori classes, and I also teach the eco-printed classes. And a lot different ones. If you're into something that you really want something taught, I could probably just, teach one-on-one also. You can email me at debberkebile1958@gmail.com. And then I'm also on Facebook of Debbie Cleve Berkebile. So that's where you can find me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deb. So folks, if you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat and I will read them off. We do have a couple that came in while you were chatting. One person is curious, what do you mean by discharge the fabric? So I think folks that are not necessarily familiar with quilting processes or dyeing processes,
Right.
it's assumed knowledge. So can you just tell us, like, what's the
Sure.
difference between your regular dyeing versus discharge dyeing?
Okay. So your regular dyeing, you're actually adding color to your fabric. You're taking white fabric and you're adding whatever color you would like. So when you're discharging, you actually use black fabric to begin with, and the discharge just means you're taking the color out of that fabric. So I usually like clamp it between wood pieces, or I'll like tie it up, just like different shibori techniques. And then you're actually taking that color out, which is called discharge.
And Deb, it's wherever you've wrapped it tightly that color is going to remain, right?
Correct. Yeah. So wherever it's tightly, the thiox cannot get in there and discharge and take your color out of. Yes, you have to do it very tightly to keep your black fabric from becoming just a dull white.
Yeah. And then additionally, the same person would like to know if you could explain the deconstructed screen printing process once again. So you were saying that typical screen printing, you'll put your image on there, and then there are spaces that are relief, that is just the screen. It's not holding the ink or
Yes.
whatever back. So what is
Yeah.
constructed?
So let's go back to that. Let's just go back to maybe I can explain it a little bit better. It's a hard one to explain until you do it, and then you're like, oh, that's really simple. So here you have like a screen that you just print from. You would turn that screen over, and I used a stencil, and I actually used a squeegee and the stencil, and I just squeegeed that thickened dye on the back of that screen. So it's like a purple. I used a purple thickened dye, and I used, as you see, it's kind of like it looks like a tire mark. So that stencil looked like that. So I turned it over, squeegeed that all on. The thickened dye actually dried. So then after it dries, you turn your screen back over, you place it on top of your fabric, and then you use another thickened dye to pull or screen print through that screen. And as you're pulling that wet thickened dye through the screen, the stuff on the back becomes loosened, and then it starts coming off on your fabric as you're going. So you'll have to do like probably 3 or 4 screen printed pieces on your fabric for that thickened dye on the back to become loose and start printing itself onto your fabric. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it's a way of screen printing that has a lot of unknown. Like, so
Yes,
oftentimes when you do screen printing, there's some exactness to it.
yes,
Whereas with this deconstructed process, there's an expectation that it'll start to disintegrate and give
yes. As you go
effects
along, right?
that
As
you
you're
couldn't get.
printing, right? As you're printing, that just at the very beginning, you don't get much of a print, and then as it starts wet, that thickened dye comes through, wetting the back of the screen, it starts coming off very, very sporadically, and you don't know what you're going to get. So it's kind of fun because you're like, "Ooh, look at that!" I've done quite a few pieces, and it's really amazing in the end what you can come up with.
Yeah, there's a little bit of magic in that in the
Yes, there is.
yeah.
Yes.
So Deb, can you tell us a little bit about how you were introduced to fiber arts or art quilt making? Like what pulled you in? Have you always done quilting?
No, actually, when my kids were little, it's funny, I kept all their t-shirts and their garments. And so at one point in time, I was like, and they were little, like 3 and 5, and I was not working at the time. So I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make a quilt, out of their t-shirts. Well, time went away. And that did happen when they graduated from high school. So I had kept all these things in a box and I had them. And so when each child graduated from high school, they actually got their t-shirt quilt done. Um, and I actually did it. See, my daughter graduated in 2005. So I had just purchased my long arm quilting machine in 2005. And so that kind of, I was quilting some quilts on my brother's sewing machine, which was not going well. It was not set up for, like, quilting on a big scale. And I was like, I really want to get, I had all these quilts, like, oh, I want to do this one and this one. And I had them pieced and ready to go. And then it was like, ugh, trying to do them on a little sewing machine. So that's when I went to the Chicago Quilt Festival. And in 2005, my daughter was graduating. I went up there and I bought a long arm quilting machine. I tried each and every one that was up there, and I ended up bringing, actually, they delivered an AQS machine that, like, in a few months, I had bought this machine. So
So you just jumped all the way in.
I did. I
Yeah.
just, and I'm known for that. If you ask my friends, they're like, "Oh, don't tell her you're going to do that," because she just jumps right in and does it. So same with Shibori, did that. I was like, I told my friend Sandy, I was like, "Oh, I really want to do this Shibori." She goes, "Oh, I did that back in the 90s." And I'm like, I'm a late bloomer. I want to do it now. So I just had people over in my yard. We'd get a bucket, we'd do our indigo vat, and we'd have lunch. We would just sit around and talk. And that's how that came about, was just like, I just want to do this. So, you know,
So that's a great kind of dovetail into perhaps the last question. Can you talk about the importance and influence of your critique group? What has it had on you? And can you talk a little bit about the quilt community? And what would you say to someone looking to create or join a community like that?
so at first I didn't really connect with people. I was working, so it was hard for me to go to groups and stuff. But when I found my friend across the street, we live in the rural Northeast Ohio. To think that we were out in the middle of Amish country, and we live right across the street from each other. And when I started these quilts in 2014, she saw on my Facebook pages doing this, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And so she's like, we need to talk about what this was. So her and a couple other people that I had known previously from years, one of them is a famous, she does portraits. And I was talking to them and I said, how do you get into this? I really want to kind of maybe throw my work out there. I want to do art quilts. I had done, I started the t-shirt quilts and all that and traditional piecing. Just really, really, I do some of it, but it's not really for me. I love the art quilts. So I kind of put my, feelers out of a couple people I knew. And then when I met Sandy, she really was like a mentor, another mentor for me to get into the world of art. Um, so she actually said, hey, do you want to, come to this critique group? And they had to okay for me to come to this group. So it was like there was 10 of us and now there's 11 of us, but we all get together once a month, and we go to each other's houses and we have lunch and we spend 4 to 5 hours together, and we talk about art, we show our art, and it's actually inspirational because sometimes you kind of get stuck, like if you got writer's block. But for me, sometimes I have quilter's block, and you'll bring a piece or you'll bring some stuff that you're working on and you're like, I don't know if this is right, I don't know where I'm going with it. And out of the box, somebody will say, hey, turn that around, or, put it this way, or why don't you put something else here? And that just really, really gets your creative juices flowing. And it just really helps when you're kind of stuck with something. But it's really been great for me because, like I said, I'm a late bloomer. I did not start in art. I don't have an art degree. I just really pretty much jumped right in and said, I want to do this. And it's really nice to see other people's perspective of something, and and how they put things together too. I mean, we have paper artists in there, we're not all textile artists. So it's kind of fun to watch the other of the groups, perspective, the way they audition things and put things together. So that's really taught me a lot, just to try and you know put things together, because the composition is hard for me because I really, didn't have an art degree, but I struggle with that. But you know what? I've learned a lot from this group. It's really taught me some things that I wouldn't have got probably anywhere else. So if you're really looking for something, that there are a lot of groups around, that we do have another group that's called NOTA, and it's for anybody to join. You can come in. And actually, it's fun. We have a meeting like 3 times a year. We do some, you can bring your work, you can show it, you can talk to people. We have like demonstrations or that kind of thing. So that's kind of how people, if you're really wanting to get into a group, that's, find a group that's kind of like on, the same level or whatever. But it really helps get that inspiration. And even I'll tell you, going to quilt shows, or if you're a paper artist, go to, paper, the Morgan or whatever, that kind of you will get some inspiration. I've got lots of inspiration from that. And then you come home and you kind of just like, it just kind of like gets in your brain, and you just can't get it out until something, till you put something on your design wall and there it is. So
Perfect. Deb, I just want to thank you again for the generosity of your time and your talent.
oh, well, I thank you for just being in the show with the curators. Oh my gosh, those girls are so wonderful. So I'm excited. I have not got to come see the show, so I will be coming down February 20 or March 28th with a group of friends, and I will be down there to see the show. So
Oh, I can't wait. Wonderful.
yeah. Yeah, so we'll be down there that morning, probably the minute you open, we'll be in the gallery. So
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. This has been a talk by Deb Berkebile as a part of our programming for It's an Honor to Be Here. I'd like to give a special thank you to the curators, Maddie and Maria, and a big thank you to all the other participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor, all who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.